when we do experience that clarity of mind, the resilience, that stability, we'll automatically notice how our stress melts away a little bit more. We'll actually touch upon a sense of stillness, or yet deeper levels of inner peace. But in the meantime, we have to work with the wandering mind and the thoughts which may arise. We have to learn to be nothing more than an observer of these mental phenomena, treating them as nothing more than the manifestation of impermanence in our mind. We might observe how the thoughts and emotions arise and pass away naturally without getting caught up in these, treating them as nothing more than clouds or turbulence passing through a clear sky. But by identifying with the stillness that is the backdrop to all these phenomena, we learn to access something deeper. It is of the nature of deep, peaceful intuition and wisdom. When we first are able to get some sort of glimpse or inkling of these inner states of mind, it will motivate us further to continue to develop these skills. And even if we get the overwhelming feeling of a restlessness building up in the mind, we find we are able to step back from that and watch the restlessness, and even to disassociate from it, allowing us to reconnect with the spaciousness in our mind. And this in turn will allow our mind to become unhooked from that restlessness and angst, allowing the mind to settle more deeply still into peace and illumination on the inside. So for now we cultivate our mind lightly and gently at the center of our body. Bring our awareness back again if it wanders away, conjuring up a new inner object if the old one disappears, but otherwise following and observing as the inner experience in our mind evolves. Each to their own meditation for a few more moments now in silence, until we come to the appropriate time. Continue to keep our mind on track at the center of our body the whole of the time. Lightly, gently, remaining with whatever inner experience we have built up for ourselves as a result of the meditation so far today. If our attention wanders away, we bring it back each time. If the inner object disappears, we can conjure up a new one. If it changes, then we just follow it in its new form. And for those who feel able, at this point we can start with our practice of loving kindness, where we generate feelings of loving kindness for ourselves and for all other sentient beings in the world. In order to put ourselves in a suitable feeling of loving kindness and compassion, it may help to start with the image of a dear friend or a family member who we care deeply about. It could even be a pet that you care about. And you can imagine that person or living being is right there in front of you. And you can connect with the feeling of loving kindness that you have for them, and with the feeling of gratitude that they're in your life. And imagine those feelings growing and expanding outward from the center of your body, as if you captured that feeling of loving kindness and allowed it to spread through every single cell in your body, from the top of your head all the way down to the tips of your toes, radiating outwards from your center. And in this way we start by extending loving kindness towards ourselves, first of all, with the wish that may I be happy, may I be healthy in body and mind, may I face my difficulties with good grace and serenity, may I take care of myself in happiness. And taking note of these feelings of compassion, care, and kindness, we send these feelings towards ourselves with a sense of tenderness and openness. And as these feelings grow and radiate more and more outward from the center of our body, eventually to cover our entire body, we can imagine it forming something like a protective bubble. Nonetheless, we imagine sending these feelings further outwards still, reaching outwards to the people we care about, imagining them being uplifted in body, mind, and spirit, as they are touched by our loving kindness and the care and gratitude that we have for them. In this way we continue cultivating and generating the feelings of loving kindness, expanding them to the other living beings sharing the room with us, spreading the feeling of loving kindness outwards from our center, so that it reaches all those other people and beings. Further outwards, we can extend the loving kindness to our friends and our family. We might send loving kindness to those in our community, even to those who we might not know very well. We We might even share loving kindness with others with whom we do not see eye to eye. But we make the wish that may all of these people, especially those in our meditation community, be safe, be happy and peaceful. May they be healthy in body and mind. May they be able to face their difficulties with good grace and serenity. And may they experience peacefulness and contentment in life. And now we imagine these feelings growing and expanding beyond this room, outwards into the neighborhood, throughout the entire town where we live, and the surrounding suburbs. Imagining the many different people, our fellow townsfolk, extending good wishes to them and to every living being, whether it be those on the land, in the air or in the sea. We imagine sending our feelings of loving kindness across the entire country, further to the whole continent, eventually to all the continents of the world, extending around the entire globe, touching people and sentient beings on every continent. All those beings with whom we share our planet, including animals of all species, all living beings. And we imagine the feelings of loving kindness growing and expanding up into the atmosphere and throughout the entire universe. For a few more moments now in silence until we come to the appropriate time. Pe Buddha Palapata Pace Kananchayam Palang Arahantanancha Te Jena Arakam Bandami Sapaso Sapa Buddha Nupavena Sapa Dhamma Nupavena Sapa Sankha Nupavena Sattha Soti Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for this evening, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So far so good, everyone. The new folks get on okay with the meditation? Ish? Something to focus on the inside? Yeah. So you have something to work with at the very least. Today I have a slightly thorny subject as a topic for my wisdom talk, which is about husbands and wives. And you might think, where on earth does a monk get the idea for the talks from? Isn't there something slightly more poignant or amusing that he could pick? But unfortunately, I'm sort of obligated to follow a sequence of talks, and at the moment I'm working my way through a sequence of what's known as the 38 Blessings of Life, or Enlightened Living, which is dealing with the idea of family harmony. And for those of you who saw me last Thursday, you will know that we were finishing off the topic of raising children to be spiritual and wholesome and that sort of thing. And the very next one on the same series is talking about relationships, marriage in particular, and the idea of how this can be turned around into something which has potential for bringing out the best in both sides of a marriage. So forgive me for this topic, but I hope it will provide at least some amusement or inspiration, and not be too embarrassing for anyone who's attending as a couple tonight. I was reading one of these culture books recently, and it was about a guy who had been living in Indonesia. And because he knew the family, he was attending the funeral of an old lady who had died. And when they asked, was the lady married? The people replied, not yet. Like, a dead person wasn't married yet. And in Indonesia, they've got this thing where there's only two correct answers to the question, are you married? Which is yes or not yet. So, like, even if you're dead, you still got some sort of potential for getting married at the last moment, you know. And I think in the West, we might not see marriage as quite so much of an obligation, but just because in Buddhist culture it's said that cherishing one's spouse is a blessing, doesn't mean that there's no other ways to receive blessings in life. And one which might be the main point about discussing this topic at all is that if you don't want to get married, then that's also fine. But if you do get married and then neglect your spouse, then that is trouble from the point of view of all sorts of sense of peace of mind, which will come back to haunt you during your meditation. Because marriage can be an emotional minefield. So if you don't have a spouse or don't plan on getting one, then you have my permission to skip the rest of this blessing and consider yourself to have got off lightly. For many Westerners, at least going back to the 60s or whatever, well, maybe slightly before the 60s, marriage has been portrayed as a sort of high point in happiness in life. And for the ancient Greeks, they used to say that, had this myth about the idyllic matrimony where men and women mutually search for their other half to make them complete. But really you could say about the same thing about coyotes or vultures or albatrosses or any other member of the animal kingdom that has a pair bond. Buddhism, by contrast, tends to base its practices on the conviction that every person can be complete in themselves if they train themselves in earnest. And going back to blessing number 6, which I talked about, where I talked about aim in life, you might remember that I said that within the culture of meditation especially, this idea of the exclusively spiritual aim in life is one reason why within Buddhism there's this idea of idealizing celibacy rather than a family life, because otherwise you're always compromising yourself when it comes to spiritual pursuits. Nonetheless, in many non-Western cultures around the world, staying single is an option which is increasingly chosen by professionals. I saw a newspaper article recently about a new book that came out called My So-Called Selfish Life, which is all about a person who decided not to get married in order to do things that she considered much more important in her life rather than having lots of children. And she was a great disappointment to all her relatives, going back probably to that sort of generation. But she got a whole book out of it. And yes, for many people, their career is more important to them than all the sort of expectations that might come with a career if they were to have to split their time between the career and a family. And in Asian cultures too, even within a married relationship, often once the children have left home, it's like the two parents often tend to lead a more spiritual life from that time forward, even if they are still together in the same home. It becomes more like a spiritual friendship than a sort of family life without the children. So there are a lot of varieties of ways people go about balancing up their spiritual life with their family commitments. Unfortunately, most people don't realize how much work a marriage takes, and they only realize once they already are stuck within the relationship and possibly with a partner they don't particularly get so enthusiastic about anymore. I guess what monks or nuns are doing would be the category of what you might call asexual. I hear it's called ACEs these days, which has sort of been tagged on to the end of LGBTQI in the sort of the long one just before the plus sign anyway. So renunciation might not be for everyone, but the idea of being married is that if you are, then you can't just shrug off the duties that are associated with it. And you need to take proper responsibility for creating happiness within your marriage. And although married life might not correspond to the highest set of aims in life according to blessing number 6, but if you can cultivate contentment, especially with your own spouse, and avoid things like promiscuity, then the married life can nevertheless be considered a substantial pathway of training and of spiritual transformation. So I've worked with what I have available to me in the Buddhist scriptures, although I should point out that majority of Buddhist scriptures are focused on sort of monastic issues, and therefore tend to talk a lot about the folly of marriage and seeing through that. And there were, for example, many couples who got married and at the first opportunity left to become monks or nuns. That's the sort of thing that characterizes most of the Buddhist scriptures. So forgive me if I had to look quite hard in order to find anything to sort of illustrate this talk with. These days, if people don't decide to stay single, and they don't want to get married, then I guess the other possibility is living together. So Buddhism might advocate singleness, tolerates marriage. Is there a sort of happy medium, like living together? Yes, there is a sort of possibility for that, with the main thing which seems to be an obstacle for one's practice being simply not being sort of serious and responsible for one another. So cohabitation might be a way out, which is a compromise. However, if there is some sort of intimacy involved, then there needs to be a sense of mutual responsibility. And this might not be on many young people's minds too much, but there are a lot of potentially fatal consequences of intimacy, and any failure in that relationship might result or impact on reputation, your health, your perception of deeper meaning in life, and any future relationships. So although there is a lot more leeway these days available to youngsters starting out in relationships, generally from the point of view of spirituality, then some sense of responsibility would need to be in there too. So it's said that marriage is more than just finding the right person. Often it's about being the right person, according to a guy called Robert Browning. And the reason for that is that if you're talking about working with the mind, then there is no greater distraction for the mind than a person of the opposite sex. This is one of the Buddhist scriptures. But if a relationship is formed out of need rather than love, then it fails to make use of the nobler virtues, such as wisdom or conscience, which might lead the two in that relationship to benefit and seek out the best in each other. Some people say that Buddhism tends to show women in a bad light. Especially if you go and look in scriptures for yourself, then you might be shocked by how disparaging the Buddha seems to be about women generally. But generally it doesn't reflect the quality of women per se, but it reflects the sort of stories that the Buddha told to put monks off disrobing when they saw women. And elsewhere in the scriptures, if you look carefully, then you will find many sort of exemplary women, and the Buddha did say that women have the equal chance of becoming enlightened. So the problem is not with the sexes per se, but it is with the idea of promiscuity being a problem. Because if people set out in a marriage and then it fails somehow, then it can be very destructive. Especially if there's a family involved. The only good thing generally that comes out of a breakup of a marriage tends to be happiness on the side of divorce lawyers who can make a good living. But apart from that, there are many other things like domestic violence, or the trivialization of serious relationships generally, or couples becoming blinkered by possessiveness, or becoming a sort of nation of two, because they haven't really thought out the whole issue very carefully at all. So maybe some of the things I can talk about today will set you thinking maybe in a bigger picture about this whole thing about marriage and what it's all about. So to come back to our advice from Robert Browning, that success in marriage is more than just finding the right person. It's about being the right person. What sort of husband or wife should we really be trying to become or to seek out in another person? And a particularly relevant piece of advice came from a scenario in the time of the Buddha, so it's going back 2,000 odd years, and in India, where there was a lady called Sujata, who at the time was causing a lot of friction in her own marriage as a result of being a little bit mouthy. And at that time, the Buddha talked about 7 different sorts of possible spouse, some of whom are desirable to be with and some of whom are undesirable. Yeah, you probably get a laugh out of this. Okay. So the first is the undesirable ones are the spouse like an enemy, the spouse like a robber, and the spouse like a boss. Okay, these are the ones you don't go for these ones. Okay. So the one like an enemy are ones who are partial to acts of violence. I don't think it's all on the male side in this Me Too age. And one husband who went in for boxing, but his wife was actually the champion boxer. So yeah, you didn't want to put a word wrong in that family. Yes. So instead of being compassionate in a relationship, if a husband or wife is cruel or threatening to their partner, then that would be the category of a spouse like an enemy. Second sort of spouse to avoid is the one like a robber. So no matter how much wealth they might have together as the couple, if one of the couple is partial to gambling, for example, or extravagance generally, then they will be headed for debt. And it's an old saying that 7 robberies of your home are better than having your house burned down. Yeah? But having a house burned down is still better than having 7 times, is still better than being married to a gambler. Why? Because even if your house burns down, you've still got the land that it's left standing on, right? But with a gambler, they might have gambled away even that in advance. And often the current word for such a sort of personality would be like a gold digger. And I've come across some who are like serial gold diggers. They bankrupt one husband, and once they've got no more money, then they go on to find someone else who's got more money. And carry on bankrupting, like a sort of personal project. Third one, spouse like a boss. So the last categories, they threaten your life or your possessions, but this time they will threaten your honor or your reputation by humiliating you, maybe in front of your friends, or they may just be lazy and put an unfair burden on you. would be like a boss. Note takers? Okay, so let's go for the positive aspects. There are 4 of these. The one like a parent, the one like a younger sibling, the one like a friend, or the one like a slave. So, a lot less intimidating is the one like a parent who, just as a parent, has unconditional love for their children, forgiving all their mistakes. If you have such a spouse, they will treat their partner in much the same way, forgiving them for anything they do wrong. And these strengths will be particularly apparent if their partner is sick or incapacitated, and they'll look after the partner with the same care that they would look after their own children, rather than thinking to abandon them or to move on. And this can also be true of a partner who dies when the children are still young, but the surviving partner sort of soldiers on, bringing up the children single-handedly without thinking of remarrying. Second one, like a younger sibling, they're almost the same in character as the parent spouse, but they're more playful, maybe a little bit more needy, moody, and emotional, maybe over-trusting, guileless, and they tend to be more careful about the behavior, and they maybe look up to and respect their partner more, as if they were an older sibling rather than an equal. 6th category, like a friend. So again, still positive, but maybe slightly less so than the parent or younger sibling. I've got the impression that in the Western world, this is mostly the sort of idealized marriage partner, someone with the same background, tastes, education as their partner. Maybe they've known them since childhood. So there might not be a great deal of sense of respect in the marriage, but the outlook on life will be similar, and they get along quite happily together. They tend to be generous and sincere with one another and empathize with everything their partner does, like a friend who perseveres through thick and thin. Last but not least, like the slave, that may not sound very constructive, but it can sometimes work out by mutual compatibility one way or another. Sometimes it's a question of level of education. Sometimes one or other of the partners have slipped up somehow in the past, so they owe their partner big time, so that sort of cancels out or something. But that can sometimes work out as well. But generally on this list, the one at the top is the most favorable, moving down towards the one at the bottom being the least favorable of the positive ones. Yes. As for the other 3 I mentioned, you don't want to go there. Okay. I have a group of followers down in Alabama, Deep South America, and they once told me a joke about a conversation they'd had with another monk who'd visited them. And apparently they were testing out the monk's knowledge of hell realms, okay? So it's not something I generally talk about very much here. But this student asked the monk, how many hell realms are there in Buddhism? So the monk said, the answer for that one would be 8. And he said, like, got Sanjiva hell at the top, all the way down to Avechi at the bottom. And the student said, no, you got that wrong. More than 8. So the monk said, oh, in that case you must be talking about all the purgatories as well, maybe satellite hells as well. So the total you have to talk about is like 456. And the student said, no, you got it wrong. There's more than that. And the student sort of revealed all, and he said, there's one more hell than the ones you're talking about, and it's not one that's known to monks. So have you guessed what it is yet? So the monk was really indignant because he thought he'd done his homework and he thought this disciple was being a little bit of a smartass. So he said, well, if you're so smart, then tell me what is this extra hell, hell number 457 or whatever it is. And the student said, it's being trapped in a marriage with someone you hate. So monks got out of that one, okay. And sometimes a marriage that hasn't worked out is described a little bit like tongue and teeth in the same mouth, in close proximity, and you have to watch out for any small thing. Even chewing your food, you can bring tears to your eyes if you're not careful by the close proximity. So how do you work out this idea of compatibility? There's some pretty sort of seedy game shows these days, which I'm sort of aware of. One called Naked Attraction. I see some familiar nods. Where they pair off people according to their satisfaction with their private parts. It's like, I haven't got a slide of that one for obvious reasons. And very few of those partners who paired off on that program actually ended up in a serious relationship. Okay. So you might therefore not be surprised that in Buddhism they have a slightly different way of thinking about compatibility. And it's not in terms of physique at all, but more in terms of compatible outlook on the world. And there's a set of 4 things known as the 4 virtues requiring compatibility. And the first of these is the level of faith. So shared beliefs about aim in life, generally. So faith might be at a certain level, might be high, might be low, but it has to be on the same level for both of the people in the relationship. Second one is a level of self-discipline or precepts, basically. Also manners or etiquette, generally same sort of standard. Otherwise, that's going to be a point of contention. Third one is the level of self-sacrifice, level of generosity, in other words, how much that person would give of themselves for maybe a wider society, whatever. If one part of the couple sort of spends too much time sort of doing good deeds or helping out in the soup kitchen or whatever, then the other part of the couple might not understand why they have been sort of sidelined. The last one is to do with wisdom. What you might say is their idea of common sense needs to also be compatible, need to be on the same wavelength. And the other one, which I sort of throw in as a sort of footnote, is the Buddha also talked about the perils of old men bringing home young women as their wives. Because when an old man takes as a wife a young, vigorous girl, he might not be able to sleep out of possessiveness for her, and that will lead to his downfall. So says the scriptures. So, supposing you have found your perfect person, the idea would be to make an honest woman of her. In the scriptures of Buddhism, like many other religious scriptures, they have quite a lot of juicy stories. They have things like polygamy, courtesans, surrogate mothers, and none of these worked out well. Okay, right, in the Buddhist ones anyway. In the old days, marriage was not a religious function in Buddhism. So if you come to like here and say, can you do a wedding for us? The answer is no. But generally, people who got married would go and register at the registry office, and then they might come for a blessing in the temple. But the sort of the marriage part would be seen as a secular arrangement, whereas any blessing would be a religious one. So it wouldn't be seen as a sacrament, sort of ordained in heaven or whatever. In fact, the monks might sort of keep their distance in case it doesn't work out, and then they come back and blame you afterwards. Yeah. So the Buddhist rituals differ from one country to another, but generally the idea of being officially married, and especially in the eyes of a wider community, is seen as a valuable thing. And a potential couple shouldn't be put off by the fact that marriage vows are going to substitute for genuine affection that's going to bond them together. But yes, if you can imagine, if one or other in the couple feels embarrassed to admit they're married to the other person, then it doesn't bode well. So generally wearing a ring or some sort of indication of marriage is a good sign. Finish with a story? Okay. So this comes from the Dhammakaya commentary again, and it's a story about a reluctant marriage and its resolution. In Buddhism, they have nuns as well, by the way. Yeah. So, once upon a time, there was a girl who was the daughter of a treasurer in a city called Rajagaha in India. And she'd been going to the temple since she was a young girl. And she wanted to be a nun from an early age. But her parents didn't permit her, saying that she must finish her studies first. So consequently, she applied herself to her studies and she became an exemplary student. And after she finished her studies again, she asked her parents' permission to become a nun. But they said no, she couldn't, because they wanted to see her married. So consequently, she got married and continued to do the best of her duties as a faithful wife. And one day, the husband was going to take her to a fair, which is like entertainment in those days. And he told her to go and put on all her best jewelry to look her best at the fair. And the wife replied, "I don't see the point of putting on any more jewelry than this." And the husband said, "Well, why not?" And she said, because he'd bought her so many nice items of jewelry. And the wife declared that any beauty we have is only illusory. The skin on our body just hides all the unpleasant things inside ourselves. And the husband teased her, saying, "If you think like that, wouldn't you be better off as a nun?" And the wife said, "Actually, those were the words I've been waiting to hear for so long. Permission from my husband to not have to go on with this life anymore." So the husband now, instead of the parents, allowed her to take ordination. She became a bhikkhuni, and because she's been so diligent in everything that she'd done in her life up to that point, within a very short space of time, she was able to become enlightened. So, to finish off with for today, I would like to say that this whole topic of marriage, I will continue next Tuesday. This is like the halfway mark. There's more. But to finish off with, I would like to say, for those who are new to meditation today, I would encourage you to try to remember what you've learned today and to practice further at home if you can. If you can find 20 minutes to meditate each day, then that will ensure some sort of progress that you can see for yourself in your meditation day by day. Some people find they like to meditate first thing in the morning, which is a nice way to start the day. Other people who have problems sleeping anyway find that meditation last thing at night serves them best. And some people who have stressful jobs like to meditate in their lunch break. But whatever you do, if you can try to build that into your daily routine, it helps you to build that into your the habits of the way you work with your mind. If you find it hard to remember the meditation technique, because I do tend to switch it around a little bit each time, there is now an app for that called MindGem, which you can download for free onto your mobile phone, and it has a lot of audio tracks on it in English, which will guide you through your meditation from all your favorite monks, and you can set the length of time to meditate and meditate along with that until you become familiar with the technique for yourself. Generally, if you meditate on your own, that's great, but the sort of inclination starts to wear off after some time, and it's often good if you can manage to join in with a meditation group in person or online or once a week. And in that respect, here we have our Tuesday meditation classes, but we also have a Thursday meditation class where the meditation is a little longer, up to 45 minutes, where you can come in and join in with the meditation class to get a little bit of inspiration or to bring along any questions which you might have. Also, as a sort of byproduct of COVID and everything that went with that, we also still do an online meditation every Saturday evening between 7 and 8, where you can meditate and also hear a wisdom talk online with those Zoom login details there. Once a month, we also do a full moon meditation, and the one coming up this month in May falls on the 15th of May, which is a Sunday evening. And because it's also a significant event in the Buddhist calendar, the Buddha's birthday in effect, we're also holding an in-person activity from 6 till 8, and you can see some of the preparations already starting with the candle lighting, lanterns being laid out in the garden. We hope to have it as an outdoor event, lighting of candles and meditation together on that day. We'll invite the mayor as well, and also some dignitaries from the hospital across the road as well, to talk about the importance of meditation. For young men amongst you might be interested in something a little bit more intensive, there's a chance to try out being a monk for 2 weeks or up to 4 weeks in the month of June. And I hear that this year it will take place in Denmark, which makes a little bit of a change if you remember this activity from pre-COVID when it was always held in Belgium. And our next meditation retreat for the weekend organized by us will be between the 8th and 10th of July, and this time we have exceptionally organized an outdoor venue for that, which is down in Somerset, Yeovil Way. It's about an hour and almost 2 hours drive from here. A nice place called the Open Pathway Retreat Center with its nice pools and gardens and some places where you can relax. And they have things like beds as well, which is you might consider as an improvement on the retreat center here. Yes. So that's all I have prepared to say today. Unless there are any questions, comments, feedback at this point, I'd be willing to hear from you. So may all of you be blessed with happiness, success, prosperity in life, success in your meditation too, and may the spiritual tips I've shared with you today help to support and encourage you for harmony in the family life now and forevermore.